Good evening, everyone. We are going to be talking tonight about our new theme for the month, which is vulnerability. And I'm, of course, not going to be talking to myself. Excellent. I'm going to be inviting Sanella. There we go.
Hello.
There she is. There you are. Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening. Did you see all these hearts that I sent to you
I
when you came out?
didn't. You better send them again.
Oh, okay. Right. Okay. I don't know how to do that now, but never mind. Here we go.
Thank you. One big one. One big one will do.
Yeah.
Oh, super,
Excellent.
super.
How are you?
I'm well. I'm well. I just wanted to maybe we can take a moment and introduce our topic and our guest for the evening, which I'm really looking forward to. So, of course, it's March now, and so our topic has changed, and the theme for the month is vulnerability, which seems a little bit of a daunting title for
I
a
know,
theme
but
for
it's
a
a
month.
timely, isn't it? It's very timely as well, given that everything that's going on. So yeah, I think it's a good thing that we are doing it
Yeah, maybe that's true. Maybe
this
that's
month.
true.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yes, the theme being vulnerability for the month, and I I can see that Chris is joining us. Let me go ahead and
Excellent. Fabulous.
join him in. Let's see if Chris can join us. So we have a special guest tonight, and it's Chris Wilson. I'm curious whether he's going to join from his account or whether he wants to join
I think
from
I
the
see,
Unshakable Man.
yeah, I see he's here. So yeah, on his account,
Yeah,
Chris Wilson. Yeah.
yeah, I've gone ahead and invited you, Chris, from Chris Wilson account.
Oh, fabulous. Oh, I can
There he
see Chris.
is.
Hello.
Hello,
Hi.
Chris. Hi
Good to see
there.
Hi.
you again.
Good to see you too. I'm so sorry for being a few minutes late. I got the spinning wheel of Instagram app on my other account, so I decided to come in through this one.
Oh,
Great.
okay.
Well,
Right.
I'm
Welcome.
glad you found us. I'm glad you found us.
Yeah.
And, speaking of vulnerability, right? So anytime you try to do
Yeah.
anything with technology, you have to face vulnerability.
Yeah.
I was just introducing the topic for the night, Chris, and this is
Mm.
actually the first live we're doing this month because we had some holidays last week, and so we didn't jump on. And so this is kind of opening our topic of the month, which is vulnerability. And you are going to be our guest for tonight to talk to us
Mm.
specifically about
Yeah.
vulnerability in men. And I just want to quickly
Uh,
introduce you to our community. Chris Wilson is the host of the account, The Unshakable Man, and he's a coach and he's a facilitator of men's spaces around personal development and well-being, and also breath work. Some really beautiful experiences with breath work. I've been following your account for quite a while. I hope I've done
Thank you.
that justice. You can,
Yeah.
do you want to add in anything else about who you are?
Yeah. I'm a human being. I'm a person who identifies as a man and a spiritual being. And I would say we do everything is around somatic self-leadership training, helping creating spaces where men can get out of their heads and into their bodies, right? And I don't like to differentiate anymore between whatever tools we're using to do that.
Yeah.
It's all about just, I'm like pulling my belly in right now and
Yeah, we can feel it when you do it.
yeah, yeah.
Thank
And
you. Thank you for
isn't it International Women's Day today?
it
I
It
is.
believe it
is.
is. So
Yes.
I think
Yes.
I need to wish you ladies happy International Women's Day because you're having the Unshakable Man in here, and if I didn't
I
mention
know.
that, I feel like I'd be doing
Thank
something
you.
wrong. So
Yeah.
Thank you. No.
yeah,
Thank you so much. And I thought about that, and I thought that is quite cool to have this conversation on the International Women's Day. So yeah, it's all kind of
mm,
cool.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. Thank you, Chris,
Yeah.
for presencing that. Um, Connected to that, and connected to our topic of vulnerability, the reason I have followed yourself and other accounts that even, you're related to and accounts like yours is because several years ago when I first started exploring vulnerability in my life and understanding how it's operating or maybe how I'm blocking it, and therefore
Mm-hmm.
blocking some of the things that I was really trying to get at the most in my life. As I was doing that research and that exploration for myself, I started understanding that it was one thing operating in my life, and I also started understanding through experiences, lived experience of men who were sharing, also through the research that I was looking into, a lot about how that operates and looks a little bit different for men. And of course, not
Mm-hmm.
identifying as male myself, it really was an eye opener for me to really
Yeah.
understand, and it was important to me. I'm married to a man. I'm raising two future men, and
Mm.
I, this was something that I thought I need to get a grasp of what this means because there may be ways that society is communicating whether it's okay or not okay to be vulnerable for men, and
Mm-hmm.
also, ways that I might be unwittingly contributing to that. And so those are some of the things we wanted to get into tonight. And if you don't mind,
Mm.
I'm going to ask Sanella to talk a little bit about vulnerability just to presence it for our community. And then maybe we'll get into getting those juicy questions and hearing from you on it.
Fabulous. No, I'm super excited. So just to frame the conversation to really say that we are working on definition of vulnerability by Dr. Brené Brown, because both Terry and I are transformational coaches. We are accredited in her work, and we use her work a lot in the work with this community and also in our coaching. So vulnerability is defined as uncertainty, risk, and emotional
Mm.
exposure. And
Mm.
the interesting thing that I think we need to kind of dig deep into is that vulnerability it's sort of like there's a paradox of vulnerability. So there is on one side,
Uh-huh.
it's not nice to be vulnerable when that is rooted in when we are feeling not good enough, when we feel inadequate, when we experience shame or fears. That is where we feel vulnerable, and it does not feel well. It doesn't feel right. And what a lot
Mm-hmm.
of us do in that sense to kind of escape that, we want to block it, we want to sort of run away, we want to numb it. But the paradox is that the other side of vulnerability, vulnerability gives us access to all the beautiful things that we want. It gives us access to love, to
Mm-hmm.
joy, to sense of belonging,
Mm-hmm.
and we all to courage. It's we
Mm-hmm.
cannot be seen. We cannot allow ourselves to be seen as much as we need to, if we are not willing to accept vulnerability. So that's a kind of like two-sided
Mm-hmm.
coin, isn't it, of vulnerability, and consequently, I think we sort of the for most people, my lived experience, and for most people, we try to run away from it, not knowing that we are also blocking the other stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
I think my first question for you, Chris, would be to ask you how were you raised? What did you
Mm.
grow up believing that vulnerability is, for you or
Mm.
people around you?
Mm. Oh, I love it. I love it. And I was putting in some notes just to keep some pieces in there. I wrote access to love, blocking unwittingly, uncertainty, risk, emotional exposure. How was I raised? And I think one of the things the first, you said, what beliefs, right? Like right when you said that, to me, um, the belief, right, is in the head, and it's shaped by exposure to my physical relationship with what happened to me, right? What did I do? What
Absolutely.
did I go through to survive to get to where I was
Mm.
when I became aware of my awareness, right? And I'm constantly doing that. And so I'd say the unconscious scripting that I grew up around, that I had a relationship with, which was, and some of that relationship with it was I didn't like it, and some of it was I did like it, right? And it had constructive outcomes and destructive outcomes, and it all brought me here. So um, I think for me, I grew up in New England, in Boston, in a family-run bed and breakfast with divorced parents, a father who uh, left his um, left his job working in a local community bank to start a bed and breakfast, extremely artistic and creative, and
Hmm.
just working in front of me every day. That's like the family farm. I got to watch my father with my little brother and I, who's 5 years younger than me, really like right in front of me every morning, waking up from dusk till dawn. I like to think of it as like the family farm.
Mm.
Um, just just building and serving and creating and making, and I mean making beds and serving breakfast, and
Mm.
was the farm, right? And there's for me there was something incredibly nourishing and romantic. um, I mean, it really is romantic. I mean, now I'm 38
Mm.
years old, and my fiance and I, like, I'm discovering that I had this whole freaking movie in my head about what it is from where I come from, but I'm not from there anymore. That's not my home anymore. I live here in
Mm.
San Francisco with my fiance and our friends, and there was like a fall from grace from me from that, of like, wow, like I was not aware that I was allowed to have problems.
Mm.
um, I didn't. My mother, my relationship with my mother right now is um, I love my mom, and even in the story of my head about who my mom is it's so um, it's really been, I think, the path for me. Like, she helped me get to where I am today in this work, but she had bipolar and was extremely abusive, and
Mm.
was my tour mentor, if you will, right? Like,
Mm, yeah.
Mm.
uh, and and even as I say that, I feel like tension, right? And
Mm.
Sure.
Mm.
Sure.
there's it's awe to me, of like appreciation and fear of just how, for as a young man, I was like off the charts aggressive. Just I tried to make race bikes for the U.S. national team, and tried to go
Mm.
to worlds and triathlons, and I found this construct at the culture that I grew up in was like, oh, this kid's great, right? Like, he's
Mm.
riding his bike, he's trying to make the U.S. national team, he's goals oriented, he's aggressive, right? And what do we
Mm.
do within the traditional masculinity of be strong, be tough, be a provider, be intimidating, be in
Yeah.
control, be respected, be athletic, be muscular, be powerful. Like, I'm just like listing off all the things, right? Like they're not, and that to me, like within our work, is called the man box, right? And
Mm.
that but what's very important to me, that whenever we engage on this, is that we remind ourselves that the man box, that the culture of manhood, is something that all humans exist in, no matter how you identify, right? So I exist within a culture of manhood as a human being who identifies as male, just as
Mm.
you ladies, right, exist within that culture of manhood, right?
Mm.
But
Mm. Mm.
then, if I want to maintain in that traditional hegemonic masculinity for my social milieu, for the group that I associate
Mm.
with, or that I like mentally and emotionally, physically, spiritually am a part of, like whatever
Mm.
is traditional, right? That's a box. That's the box that I fit into. And when I step out of that box, I become don't be a mama's boy. Don't be a sissy. Don't be
Mm.
open. Don't be passionate. Don't be like flowy.
Don't be out of the
Like,
box.
don't be out of
of
the
the man
box.
box.
Right. And so that is all dictated and controlled through one emotion, primary emotion, which is shame.
Yes.
Right? Which is the emotion that says, if I do this, I will not be allowed in the tribe.
Yeah.
Right?
Disconnected. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so the shame is constructive in the sense that it kept us together in tribes, right? It kept us from doing things that were, it kept us together to survive, right? Yet it's also destructive when we don't honor it and flip that shame into guilt. We carry it, right? We actually force it down. And I heard you say earlier, block, right? Like you were conscious of blocking, like, and I think that this is what we teach men in these spaces, is that there is something to experience, right? Like there is something going on inside my body, and the only way I can feel is in my body. I cannot think a feeling, right? Like I sensual experience only happens in the body. Like it does not happen in the brain. It does not happen in the mind. The mind responds to this apparatus that has a nervous system and physical sensation in the body. And so when I am a part of this man box and raised, I go through that adaptive process as a boy, which disconnects me from my body because I am being tough.
Yes.
Right.
So I have a follow-on question to the man box.
Yeah.
If I can jump in.
Yeah, please do.
I'm curious about when I'm working with my coaching clients, I often try to identify for them or help them identify what is the age. And sometimes I even kind of do it like, how high were you? How tall were you when you realized there was a box that you were supposed to be in?
Wow. I love that. Oh, lots of ages. Are you asking
Of course,
me?
throughout the ages. Yeah, maybe
Yeah.
I guess I'm curious about what's the first age? How young does that happen? Do you have a sense of how tall you were? Like if you're moving your hand, to your height, where do you stop?
I think I had trouble with an age, but the first height that I thought of was when my mother is 4'11", and when I got taller than her. Right? So I remember I'm 5 years older than my little brother, and so around that time, right, of realizing that there's a spectrum of acceptability, right? But I think that even as I answer that, to be honest, it's BS of the mind, right? Because that's not my adaptive process. Like that was happening way before that memory, right?
Sure.
It's happening like so much, so unconsciously. And I think that becoming aware of my awareness, and I just constantly reminding anybody that I'm interacting with within these spaces that this is not a cognitive process. It's not something we think about. It's something that happens. It's natural, and it's been happening
you don't know
since the minute you're born.
It's happening. Yes.
Yeah.
And what's interesting from your story, and just thinking because a lot of our community are parents, and what's interesting in there, how you, if I got it right, you had your father seems like to be a man who modeled a lot of vulnerability, like leaving his job to start a business. Starting a business is a very you know,
He wasn't
more.
very, I wouldn't say that he was very
Oh, okay.
vulnerable. No.
Okay.
Um, I mean,
So,
I appreciate his, like, I see in him, like, in the way he was. But if I had to give him an archetype to better explain it, I would say a farmer, right? And like, what's your somebody who is like out in the sun all day long, working 14 hours a day every day for 20 years, never taking a day off. Like, how vulnerable can you be, right?
You
Like,
talked about an aspect of creativity in him, though. Can you speak
mm-hmm.
about when he was in his creative mode?
Well, I think he was always in it. It's like
Was he
inseparable
making
from
art? Or
his art was that. like,
kind of,
oh, okay.
yeah, the
Yeah,
yeah,
business.
yeah.
yeah, like to be immersed in, you don't do, he didn't, I mean, it's this is probably like the thing that I deitize in my father, right? That ability to just create a space, and to nurture it, and to devote himself to it, um, and to never leave it, and yet think about the destructive qualities of that, right? Like, he never left,
Yeah.
right? And like, think about
Yeah.
the
There was a
archetype of
cost.
masculinity. Think about what
Yeah.
that is for me. That isn't even a bad thing, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's a little gross. Like, it's a little, right? Like not. I mean, I raced bikes I did like hundreds of races. He probably went to one, right? Like, right, because he worked on the weekends.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
farms,
Right?
it's, yeah, that type
Yeah,
of job. So, I mean,
yeah.
you gave us a long list of things that, you know, the messages that men receive, who they need to be. And as you kind of listed it, I'm thinking, well, there is no much space amongst these messages to you know, to be open to any sort of risk, and kind of emotional, you know, being emotionally open. But I'm curious, your perspective, is there parts of life where it's more acceptable to be vulnerable? So what I'm thinking about is, you know, we have our relationships, we have our, you know, being at work, businesses, then our friends, family. Do you see that it is in this age, like kind of coming to this moment, is vulnerability more acceptable in certain places than others for men?
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, yeah, of course, right? Like there's, of course, there's containers everywhere, right? That we from going to public speaking class, to be taking a pottery workshop, to moving, transitioning cities, right? It's very different to live in one city versus another, or, right, different social milieus. But I don't think it's really, I don't it's not that not to disregard your question, but I think, like, the part that it's more, to me, the part that I bring my awareness to is that this is a path, an unfolding path of discovery for everybody, for everyone, right? Like, women are asked, if you want to participate in this culture of masculinity and manhood, excuse me, in the culture of manhood, and I differentiate my usage of the word femininity and masculinity from manhood, because manhood is a culture, right? Masculinity is an energetic way of being. You are masculinity and femininity. I have
Sure.
masculinity and femininity. And if I am
Absolutely.
on, Dr. Chris Bromberg actually just popped in, who's creative partner and friend in this work, and we've been talking about the man box at length in our podcast, and he's and so what I think that to just paint a picture of this across different channels, right? Like, different perspectives. Like, we could take the Zen Buddhist approach. We could take the clinical psychology, like, North American approach, right? Like, bunch of white guys who, humanistic psychology movement, right? Like Ivy League educated. We could take the embodiment route, which was pushed out of the psychology practice because of the disconnection, the connection of the practitioner to the patient, right? So this idea that like the person who is holding space has to in some way be separate from the experience of the person they're sitting with, right? Like that was pushed out of now, and now we're seeing these with a better understanding of the nervous system and of like Eastern and Western philosophies coming together, as well as I think the people doing their work, right? Like physically feeling and going through their own healing and connection processes, because we can't learn this stuff in a book, right? Like words are pointing to a physical experience in the body. And when we read about mindfulness, when people read about mindfulness, we translated it to mindfulness when it was actually bodyfulness. It was the soma, right? The somatic experience in the body. So to just come back to that question of like, are there places where we can be vulnerable? It's like, yes, there are. There are definitely places that we can be vulnerable. I think the key is to create that polarity in your life, right? So no matter where you are, I need to find places that are outside of my normal to be able to create polarity, right?
Yeah.
So in our groups, what do? We create check-in groups where guys come together and we have structure, right? Like we create a masculine structure. The structure of the group is masculine so that we can be feminine, right? But in order for the cognitive part of the brain, in order for the fear center of the brain, the managerial center of the brain to say, okay, I can let go, we need to be able to trust that when we let go, when we drop into these spaces to get into a more liminal part of the body, that part of the brain needs to be like, it needs to have its attention on something.
Taken
right?
care
And
of.
so, right. And so what we do is we come into the space and we arrive, we ask everybody in the space, like, hey, is there anything you need to let go of to be here? Right? We go through some agreement setting, right? It's very important to have some agreements because we're creating a relationship here, right? And so many of us have never had a relationship with where we understood the difference between confidentiality and secrecy. We understood the intention to drop out of our head into our body, the ability to reinstate safety when it's lost, we're not actually wanting to create a safe space, right? Like we don't want to create safe spaces because when we create a safe space, we make the space unsafe. We make people afraid to make other people feel unsafe, right?
Yeah.
And that's the vulnerability paradox, right? So what we want to do is create brave spaces where the key intention is learning how to reinstate safety when it's lost so that I can take a risk, right? So like we had a group on Monday where a man got really angry in the group and said, hey, stop giving me adjustments. I want to like, let me talk, right? And the structure of the space allowed 9 men in that container. There were noticeable men moving on the screen, moving backwards, and yet having a structure so that when they notice the physical sensation in their body of, right, the story in their head popped off of this man's yelling at me, they were able to notice the story in their head, come back to their body, remain in the space, give that man what he needed, which was space, because anger is about agency, right? Like anger can take a life or save a life, right? And then when that anger passes in a constructive, healthy way, everybody gets to have that completion event. We all get to hold that man and find out what emotion is underneath, right? And it's usually sadness, right? It's usually, right? And then
There's
the
usually
final
something
one
much
little piece
bigger.
I just need to add in here is that love is not an emotion, right? Because when we do this work, we think with our ideas, we think there are good emotions and bad emotions. And so we move away from some emotions and we move toward others, right? And we get this idea that there's acceptable and unacceptable emotions.
Yeah.
But when we
So
have a
true.
physical experience of allowing any and all emotions to be present, what we actually find is we're just being with,
Yes.
right? Like I'm
Yeah.
learning to be with these things, the physical sensations in my body, and that's love, right? Like that is awareness, that is being with, and
Oh,
it's physical. It's physical.
Yes.
I
So
love,
sorry, I'm
love,
like on
Yeah,
my
yeah,
things. So let's run it around.
no, it's beautiful. But what's beautiful, I think you've just described there what vulnerability, it's that we need to allow people to feel. I love that sense that even,
We need to
all
allow
emotions are
ourselves to
welcome.
feel.
Exactly. And that is a part of, so vulnerability is not just, okay, I share something. It is about sharing and appreciating and noticing the whole spectrum of my like lived experience, and not shaming ourselves or not shaming other people for that. And I think that's right, because vulnerability is also, I need to be vulnerable to be able to show myself to you as I am. And that is the and that's quite tricky. But
Right.
so I either need to have some ways of holding my, having my own back, or be in a situation that you are, or group that you are describing, whether
You need
that's
to
a group
be
like,
in a group. You need to be in a group. You cannot do this alone. Like it's not
no,
like
this is
and
the
yeah.
fundamental. I mean, if we can, I mean,
Yeah.
vulnerability is not,
it's
it
not
cannot be practiced
no.
in a vacuum,
No,
right? I mean,
and
if
Right.
that's
you're
not exactly
if you're on
and that's
if you're
not
on
what
your
I'm.
own, you're
No,
actually
yeah.
No,
there's no
vulnerability.
vulnerability there. You're pretty
Vulnerability is
safe.
relational. It's
It's
relational.
Yeah.
relational.
It's
It's relational.
relational.
Yeah.
What I wanted to say there is we need to know how to allow ourselves to feel. So we need to learn to support ourselves through that process, and to know what happens when we are met with a with a unwanted, like, that guy yelled or screamed, and people held space. In real life, that may not happen. So we
Yeah.
need to
Higher
have
stakes.
ways to access that space. That could be a friend, that could be somebody, but we need to be able to hold
Can I
ourselves
give you one?
in that vulnerability, to access the support. Say that
Yeah.
again.
If I'll just give one, like one way, like to do it is a cutting breath. So when you notice yourself feeling scared or whatever the response is, what happens? Like that is the moment you're becoming conscious, right? So now you're noticing I'm reacting to something. So a cutting breath is it's cutting. You just right?
And you
'Cause
incorporate your breath work into the program so that you are
the whole thing's flowing. Yeah.
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I really appreciate how you create the structure of your groups so that it gives the men who are showing up there permission, and like you said, if we can talk about a different type of a box, a container, right, to that structure that feels like, what they need from a masculine perspective is taken care of, and then they can be more with. And so many things that you pointed to, like this emotion of anger. Anger is far more acceptable of an emotion for men to feel from a societal perspective. Like society gives men
exactly
permission to feel angry and to look angry,
to
even
show it.
maybe more so than even women. I mean, I think in general, people are more okay with
dirty pain, I would call it. Dirty pain, not clean pain.
Yeah. What's coming up for me in terms of vulnerability, also talk about in different areas of men's lives, is that if you give this definition, that vulnerability is risk, uncertainty, and emotional exposure,
Love
there
that.
are
I love
certain
that.
there are certain risks that I think men feel very emboldened to take, right? Yes, I'll take that promotion. Yes, I'll put myself forward for that board position. Um, yes, I'm going to make a decision, and maybe I don't know, have all the information, so there's uncertainty there. Somehow, the leaders that I'm working with, that they don't even realize that that is also vulnerability, right? You know, leaning into risk,
Mm.
leaning into uncertainty. They don't they think
Mm.
it's only the
I,
emotional exposure
I,
part.
I would, I would like to, for me in my head, when you say that, I differentiate between being brave and courageous, and using bravado to shutting down a part of my body in order to
Mm-hmm.
move through a challenging experience, right?
Mm.
And so just because we see a man um, go for that promotion, I think the constructive outcome to shutting down your physical sensations that are happening in your body and dropping your somatic awareness is that you're operating with, you're not getting, you're literally just compartmentalizing the
Yeah, they're
Mm,
experience.
mm,
disassociating with that
Yeah,
bravado, as you
yeah.
said.
And I would say that a lot of what people characterize as what we see in like the predominant culture in business and is that, right? It's not an open-hearted, conscious leader who's holding
Mm-hmm.
space
Mm-hmm.
for their own experience, which is an incredibly skillful and I mean it's something we discover. I'm I'm challenged by this every day. Like it's just a constant life practice to become an it's I mean, you know, it's you're a warrior of heart and mind, right? Like it requires just an incredibly dynamic ability to work with yourself and with the fundamental ground, like with whatever is in front of you and whatever you're dealing with. And so I just I think that the and women are asked to participate in that culture with
mm,
men of that business culture, which is being asked to shut down in order to be a part of it, right? But I mean, we have different cultures and different companies, right? But I have to share one thing you just like brought up, just creatively, like, you know, I was in a conversation and with a woman, and she was telling me about how she like specifically reached out to me. She's like, it sends me this article, and it was about all of the uh, uh, it um, in Kiev, a group of people were on a bus recently, and they asked the men to get off the bus, right, and to stay to fight, right, and the
mm,
women and children were allowed to leave. And I just
Yeah.
think
mm,
that that's like this picture, right, like this picture of there is a war happening right now,
mm, mm,
and that we as human beings um, have ways of reacting and responding throughout our entire life. We could be
Yeah.
reacting to what has most recently happened to us from a place of fear and fighting a
mm,
war, right? Not just between Russia and the world, between ourselves and other human beings. We can be
mm,
in our head in an egoic state, reacting to whatever has most recently happened to us with unconscious scripting. And that is unconscious. That's not like when we are conscious, we are connected to our capital self as self, which is creative, connected, whole, right? It's this
Mm-hmm.
it's like this effervescent thing that I think many human beings have never experienced for very long, right? Because
mm,
the structure of their life is so violent. You have to like, you're killing yourself just to live every day, right? Like just to survive, right? Like to just put food on the table, right? And
mm,
so we put a shield over our heart, and we
Yeah.
are like, that's what I feel like when we talk about vulnerability. I just want to like bring it in here, because it's just like, my fiance laughs at me because I always make this thing. I go, "Pff," like I'm like, because it's so
What
intense.
does
It's
that
so
mean?
like, it's just, to me, it's like the explosion of like just it's like magic. It's sad. It's
Okay.
I can cry right now, like when I go there. Like it's just
Mm.
um it's in Brene Brown's most recent book, the picture of a sheep with the dead sheep, the dead baby lamb,
Mm.
and the crows around it, like the sadness of
Mm.
life, like the reality of death. Like
Yeah.
it's just,
Mm.
it's real, right?
Mm.
And many people, um, having an open heart is costly. It
Mm.
requires a lot of skill
Yes.
to be able to
Yes.
have
Yeah.
it.
I
Yeah.
was just gonna say it's a big ask
Yes.
of any
No.
human
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
to lean into this vulnerability. And we know that there's the reward. We know that on the other
Yeah,
side there is connection to self, with the
yeah,
Mm.
capital S, and to others, and to life, and to meaning, and to emotional experience, versus, like you said, taking the risk and using the armored heart to
yeah.
push through
Mm. Mm.
I
the
would
tough
say that
moments.
I know I'm interrupting you, but you just said reward, and like we have to make a point about, I have to make a point right now about reward, that like to the part of our anyone who's listening about the like, oh, like it's costly to be vulnerable. It's not, once you do it. Like once you do it, it's actually energetically, it's an annuity. Like you're investing. Like
Mm.
you are now an investment banker
I
in your
love that
freaking life,
analogy.
right?
Yeah, that's
Like
great.
you're fucking making money, right? Because it's not, like, if in power versus force, right? Like that thing, like where, like I'm pushing down, it takes physical energy to hold back
Yeah.
this in the body. And we're
Mm.
just
Mm.
getting like, I mean, all these books are just getting to the point where we have somatic science to really talk about this, and to show that the heart has its own rhythm, right? Its own energetic vibration, and we're cut off from that. It takes energy in our
That's so
life just to
true.
keep up,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And
Mm.
so
Mm.
when you
It's
take that risk, it gives you energy back.
Yeah. Yeah.
yes.
Okay. Just to build on that. So you said that flip, that sort of there is the mindset shift that happens when you
Mm-hmm.
start looking at vulnerability as something that is amazing and it's an investment and all of these things.
Body set.
What is in when you look at the men who come to your group, what kind of mindset shift? How does that happen? What is that mindset shift
It's
that they go
body.
from
It's
X
body.
to Y? Tell us more.
It's, yeah, it's body set. It's the
But how do
story
they
follows
go?
state.
How do you know that? What happens for them to
Yeah.
I know we most of us go around in here, but then you men arrive into your group, and then
Mm-hmm.
from that
Oh,
space. Oh, hello.
I was
Yeah,
getting the
Yeah, I
I
spinning
lost
think
wheel
you.
for
we
just a
missed you.
second.
They
Oh yes.
arrive in
Yeah.
the
Okay.
group. How did they get from head
How
to
did it?
body?
Yeah.
Yeah,
What
yeah. It's like
shift
this. It
happens?
goes, you start right here and you go, oh, like
On the
yeah.
first
Or
day,
actually, maybe it's backwards. Maybe it's backwards. The yeah, on the
run for the
first day,
door.
like the first like minute, no, no, I'm joking. The other part of this is that it's fun, like this is, if we're serious, right? Like like I want to like point something out, like the quality, like I feel joyful, creative, vibrant, right? Like excited, enthusiastic. These are like the qualities of being, of like having conversations like this, right? That is being for me, and a sign of being in self energy, right? When I was coming in here, I was seeing the spinning wheel of death on my phone. It's even, we call it the spinning wheel of death. I had sweaty palms. I noticed tightness in my chest. I noticed a bigger smile on my face, which was masking my inner experience. And I wanted to remove the smile, but I didn't want to look like I wasn't smiling, right? Like, and
all of
right,
it,
and
yeah.
that, right, and I was aware of that, right, and like, and like, I taught public speaking for a long time, right? Like it's like, come on, like the amount of training that it took, right? And I'm enjoying this experience. Imagine if I wasn't, like,
Yes, yeah.
if my relationship with those sensations in my body, if my relationship with those sensations was to run away, then I craft a whole different potential future reality and completion event. And then that story is real, right? Like that story in the head becomes real, right? And so what we talk about in our groups is that, or what we show guys is that you don't have to do anything. We don't want you to try. Like, I don't want you to try. You're just being, you're there. And what happens is when we gather with the structure, the magic, the like of this is so like special. It's so like, we're just being human beings with each other. The magic is in knowing that, is that when another man witnesses another man take a risk, right, and open his heart, we are unconscious to the relating that's going on, right? So like something that I'll often see in a group when I do it in person, I just started another group here in San Francisco, is that, these guys, they all want to be friends. They all come into the space. We're in there for a month and now they're wanting to go out and be friends. And I don't want to be friends, because friends, the word friend to me, for a lot of these guys, is that then you have to please these people in some way, right? And so I don't want to be friends. I'm there to practice. I want to drop into places I've never experienced within myself. And the only way I find that is when I get surprised by it, right? Like one of the best ways that it happens is when one man in the group is experiencing something and it has the ability to tap into it and stumbles on a place inside and just goes into it, and another man is asking him, what are you feeling? Where do you feel in your body? Like what is it? What's its shape? What's its texture? What's your relationship with it? Breathe into that.
And being
Breathe into that.
invited by another man into
Yeah.
that space.
So when I invite, I am taking over his frontal cortex. So when I ask you, like, hey, what are you feeling right now? Where do you feel it in your body? Your part of your brain, that managerial part, can relax, right? And now your awareness, which you are, like you are not, you are that which is experiencing, you can drop into these greater functions. And what earlier you were saying, like, well, we all think top up here. That is that's a belief system, right? Like that's real but not true. Like that's real because you express, that's how we exist on Instagram and stuff. If we actually practice just a little bit, like not very much, like I think an hour a week hanging out in groups with us, like it shows you that you're not that a different way of being, and then that changes how you show up outside of the group. But I would say that that relational intimacy of one man takes a risk and then another man feels something, and then you see a man's reaction, and then someone who's skillful in the group says, hey, what was that? What just happened? What was that? Oh, when he did that, I felt scared. What were you feeling? Or what are you feeling? Not what are you feeling right now? Tense, right? Do you want to go back in there? No, I don't want to do this right now. Okay, great. We'll move on. right?
And
So it's just
creating
like,
those spaces where that's allowed, because I sense in my clients when they start practicing vulnerability
mm-hmm,
and they have an experience where they're like, you were right. When I opened up, suddenly
yeah,
this other person across from me opened up and we talked about something that we had never talked about
Mm-hmm.
together before, right? It just,
mm-hmm,
I think once
mm-hmm,
people have that experience, they feel the reward of that investment,
mm-hmm,
right? And I
Mm-hmm.
loved what you said about you don't have to try. Um,
yeah,
so many
it's
of
an
my
allowing
coachees will,
process.
yes, yes,
Mm-hmm.
and they come and say, as leaders, I'm being asked to be more vulnerable because this is the thing in organizations now. We want
Yeah.
more open, vulnerable leaders. They're like, okay, so how
How
many
do I
times do I
do
have to cry during a town hall? I'm like, um, well,
Mm,
you don't. I'm like, you don't have to try to be vulnerable. You
mm-hmm,
already are vulnerable. The if there's
mm-hmm,
any effort to be had, it's in taking the brakes off. It's in taking the arm. Just you don't have to try to be
armor up?
vulnerable. Just
Mm,
stop armoring up.
mm,
Just
yeah,
focus on
yeah,
being aware of when the armor is coming up and what that feels like, and that practice of leaving that armor off. And then they
mm,
yeah,
can have these experiences that really bring back to them that energy that you were talking about. It's really beautiful when they
mm.
yeah,
experience it.
yeah.
True,
I do feel
true.
caring though for that leader, because that it's a lot to be asked to be vulnerable
Mm,
in the context of a work environment, right? Like, and I I'm speaking from a I'm I'm very I'm I want to just remind everyone, like, I'm speaking from the context, and context is important because context is not story, it's the building blocks of the perspective. That context that I'm speaking from is like, we're doing somatic self-leadership training, right? Like we are meeting with this intention to
mm,
do these things and to step out of the default mode, and that is what creates that dynamic polar opposite, which is constructive and for an adaptive process, and really and good. But but I feel tense when I say around any suggestion of a man leaving that space, or a parent, like when you leave
mm,
that space, like what we call it is future pacing, and we'll have three different tools we'll use, which is a line of inquiry, a stretch, or a work statement, and often we'll drop into something, into a subject, into a state of being, and there'll be a subject or something they're working on, and maybe it's like um, think about one that was real, without personal and identifiable information related to business. A man here in San Francisco, he leads a tech team, um, and there's some very real issues with hiring and firing, and raising money, right?
Mm,
And this like, do I am I being honest? Am I being dishonest, right? With the potential of having to fire, with having to let go of people if we don't get this round,
mm,
right? And coming into that and feeling that, allowing yourself to feel that is like devastate, like just a lot
mm,
of emotion is there. And so then it's like, okay, what is your stretch here, right? Like, what is your
mm,
stretch? How do you want to bring this into your world? How do you want to make it real? And that's up to him,
mm,
right?
mm,
That's where the creativity comes into play, because now when you're in that self energy, you're more creative, and the group can help a man come up with what to do. And within the structure of a startup team, that might be like, okay, I'm going to have a conscious conversation, and I'm going to take a risk, but I'm going to do it within a controlled environment. I'm going to do it with my co-founder. I'm going to do it with the accountant,
Yeah.
right? And I'm gonna create a space where like I can be like really talk to them about my anxieties and about the pressure that I've been holding, and about how this has been affecting my relationship with my partner, and how I feel like I have to be dishonest. But then from that place, we craft a next step, right? A way to step in and to be more open about the reality of what the team is going through.
Yes.
Right.
Absolutely.
And so
that's the vulnerability people are asking for.
Yes.
You know, they're not asking for you to go into the town hall and unleash all of your deepest
be
fears
needy.
and anxieties.
Yes, no.
They're asking you to do that work in a space with a cohort of people, where your safety is is there. And I think that I mean, even Brene Brown will say, you know, vulnerability without boundaries is not vulnerability. Like
exactly. Yeah.
And the more I do this work, and the more I do this work with a variety of populations, and you know, people who identify by different races, different genders, different sexual orientations, I can tell you that bringing up the conversation around vulnerability, especially in the workplace, there are places where it's not safe for people to take that armor off yet. And I think when we ask people to be vulnerable, we have to be very, very mindful that there is, you know, a vulnerability that's not, it's not an equal ask for everybody in every situation. And there are places where some elements of that armor are required, at least in our society today.
They're at choice.
Always.
I do want to just add in. I mean, like, you guys, we've mentioned it a few times about like men having these spaces, but I hear a lot from women who say like, I have a really hard time finding a women's group where they're not being falsely supportive, where women are not just like cheering on women. And what I notice is that I think like the man box, the polar to that, right, the yin to that yang, for the culture of womanhood, is this idea of like we support all women, you're all supporting each other. But really, when you look at how they vote for each other, is they don't vote for each other, right? So like their words say one thing, but their actions are another, and then that's manipulation, right? And so what I like, something I crave is doing more of what we're doing, the exact structure in men's groups, with more mixed groups of men and women, or just women, because it's like I think that masculine, that structure to create the boundaries, it's just needed for all of us, right?
Well, then you're at humanity.
Human need. Exactly. Fabulous. I mean, that was super useful, and I can see that we could go on. We already at an hour, just to let you know.
Oh my gosh.
I blocked off an hour.
Thank you. No, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. Thank you so much for all those insights. I think I'm going to rewatch just to sort of catch the bits that resonated with me. As a kind of leaving note, maybe, where are you being vulnerable in your life right now?
I mean, the first thing that popped into mind that I stopped myself from saying was sexually, and in the bedroom, intimately with my fiance, and just stepping into really asking for what, playing with desire, and asking for what I desire without shutting myself down, telling myself that I won't get what I want, and something that's really amazing about my partner's her exploration into her own groups with women, and she brought into the into our relationship the ability to receive requests from me. So instead of if I make a request, it doesn't. I think I'm a recovering nice guy, the guy that like didn't know I was, but like in being in relationship, like wanting to be a good man, right? Like wanting to be a good guy, but a good guy isn't a real guy, right? And it isn't being open with my desires of what I really truly expressing what I want, and with the potential of not getting it, right? And so I think that's been a really exciting thing.
I'm so glad
I'd say even more for her because she's awesome.
Brilliant.
So,
Brilliant.
Thank you for
That's
sharing
brilliant.
that, Chris. I think it's absolutely, Sanella and I talk about all the time. It's like, it's we call it sometimes the final frontier of vulnerability, but it's actually probably the original initial frontier. And absolutely, there's a place where I think there's also our cultural social norms show up sexually and in the bedroom, and it can block us being fully vulnerable and having our needs met. So thank you for presencing that. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank
you. This is wonderful.
Really so grateful for your insights, and we look forward to staying in conversation with you and your community as well.
I would love to have you two both on our podcast. So you'll see an invite from me, and I just really appreciate this. Thank you so much.
Anytime. Thanks, Chris. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye, ladies.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.